Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're going to have a great time today, David. We're so excited to have you with us. We're going to get everyone welcomed in. Give me just 1 second.
Perfect. I turned orange, but that hopefully will change back.
It is well. It is well.
You gotta love Zoom.
We're going to have a great time today. We're going to have a great time today. We're really looking forward to the information. Hi, everyone. My name is Ty Adams, here to welcome you to TRA Marketplace 2020. Thank you for joining us today. Session is going to be building a kinder restaurant. Please feel free to, throughout the entire session, drop your questions in the Q&A window below. But without further ado, before we go any further, I'm excited to introduce our Big Ben sponsor, Texas Mutual.
In response to the pandemic, Texas Mutual will distribute $330 million in dividends to eligible policyholders 2 months ahead of schedule. We're also sending $2 million to nonprofits on the front lines of the COVID-19 effort. Better days are coming, but in the meantime, we'll be on the job helping Texas businesses. To learn how dividends are supporting employers in this time of need, go to texasmutual.com/dividends.
Awesome. We are so grateful for Texas Mutual being a huge sponsor to the Texas Restaurant Association. But to kick this session off and without further delay, I want to introduce to you Mr. David Shar, and he will be able to tell you more about himself. Mr. David.
Thank you so much, Ty. Really appreciate that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if it'll let me. There we go. That's where you get to see all my dirty laundry when I first open that. It never opens directly onto the right window. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and for the Texas Restaurant Association to do something like this. COVID has been incredibly impactful on all of us, but maybe very few as much as you guys in the restaurant industry. I'd love to know what your job roles are. If you guys could post some of those and Ty could read some off. Is there a capability to do that, Ty?
Yes, that's what I was telling you in the beginning.
Perfect.
We have the Q&As and I'll keep them coming and we'll get them out.
Thank you so much. Yes. So I want to know what kind of roles you guys are in, but whatever role you're in, if you are living in this universe right now, you are being impacted by COVID. And if you are in food service and the restaurant industry, you are really getting hit by COVID. And so thank you to the Texas Restaurant Association for putting this on and for inviting me to be here with you. And thank you for taking time out of your day, especially for such an interesting topic, how to build a kinder kind of restaurant. A lot of people will look at this title and think, are you kidding me? A kind restaurant? I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to pay my bills. I'll worry about kindness later. I'll worry about my employees later. Yes. And I totally get that. But today we're going to be talking about the importance of controlling the inside of your restaurant, inside your four walls, when the rest of the world seems like it's on fire. Yes. You know, it's specifically times like these when we have to turn to our team for support and to offer them support. It is specifically times like these when the world starts to turn its back on you that you need to be there and recognize the team and the business that you've built. My wife and I, our first year of marriage, had to figure this out. Every time I'd go to work and I'd get stressed out and I'd come home and I'd be nasty toward her and she'd be nasty toward me, and things would just start rolling out of control and make things worse. I was an idiot when I first got married. Happy wife, happy life. But that started somewhere in year 2, where we took a minute and we're like, wait a minute. We're supposed to have each other's back. And when the rest of the world turns its back on us, that's when it is most important to have each other's back. And
Yes.
so it is the same for you, whether you are the restaurant owner, whether you are a manager, whatever your role is in this team, it is specifically in a time like this that we'll talk about why times like this are impacting you way beyond just your bottom line. But in times like this, you need to rely on your people. What we're going to be talking about today is not just about how you can be kinder to your employees, but it's really about self-care as well. And those two
Yes.
things are the same thing.
Yes.
So I want to start with a check-in. My wife is a preschool teacher or a first grade teacher, and this is what she does at the beginning of every day. And I stole it from her because I think adults are perfect with this too. She calls it her fist to five. So we're going to do a fist to five, and I'm going to ask you a question. But when I ask you this question, I'm not asking you the question in terms of the 2019 version of this question. I'm asking the 2020 version of this question. In other words, I actually care. How are you doing? So how are you doing right now? Remember when that used to be easily answered by, oh, great. Now it's almost insensitive to say great, even if you're feeling great. Like we actually care when we're asking the question. So I want to check in with you. So if you are feeling energized and things are going great, then great, good for you. Give me a 5. If you are really feeling down and you are literally like spending most of your days in the fetal position in an oversized bathrobe, not that I know anything about this, but if that's what you're doing on a daily basis and you are feeling completely disengaged and burnt out, then give me a 0 and give me a number somewhere in between. And I guess you can pop that in the chat box or the Q&A box rather,
Yes.
Even if it's not a question. And what kind of answers are we getting, Ty?
Well, actually, we have some people are saying 3 and 4, depends on the day. Then we have some people that are saying 3 to 5. A lot of 3s lately. A lot of 3s.
Yeah.
A lot of 3s. Yeah.
And there's no wonder to that. I recently heard this new study came out that they had done. They had surveyed before Corona and then after Corona, and what they found was. Or very recently. And what they found was before Corona, we had about 13 to 15% of people reported symptoms of depression and or anxiety. And the survey that just went out was a third of the people, like 33% we're talking about in that range, which is a whole lot of people. But it makes total sense. It makes total sense that we're not getting a ton of 4s and 5s. And I'd even maybe argue that some of those 3s are brave 3s. We didn't tell them, we can't really see who's saying 3 or whatever. It's anonymous. That's usually what I open with anytime I survey. But those might be some brave 3s, and that's great. But those numbers are a little bit alarming because this is having an impact on us. So we're in the restaurant industry. And I started off in the restaurant industry, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But within the restaurant industry, we know how to take a hit. We know how to take a punch because it's not easy. There is nothing easy about food service. I think everyone in food service would agree with that. And so we have all the time, we have these existential crises and these really hard days and hard weeks, right? Those things happen all the time. We're not immune to those, and we're very, very familiar with those. I remember to this day the moment. So I was in the ice cream industry and decided to get in just at the beginning, as I was telling Ty, just at the beginning of the Great Recession, and then right after that, as things started bouncing back. People decided they wanted to be healthy and eat yogurt. I hate frozen yogurt. No offense to anybody in the frozen yogurt sector, but everybody decided, okay, we're done with ice cream and one yogurt. And I remember the night, it was 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm laying there in bed next to my wife and trying to fall asleep. And my mind is racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. I could not figure out how I was going to make payroll that Friday. It was so enormously stressful because it wasn't about just how do I put food on my table. It was how do I put food on the table of my employees who have been working so hard. And so after trying a shower, after eating everything in my kitchen, nothing was working. And so 4 o'clock in the morning, I said to my wife, I gotta go. And it was almost like she understood because she didn't say no. Maybe she was tired of me keeping her up. She's like, okay, go. I drove down to my ice cream parlor and walked into this empty ice cream parlor in the middle of the night in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. And I sat at my desk and started going through papers and upcoming catering events and bills and trying to figure out how I was going to make this work before breaking down in the most primal, I would say, cry I've ever had in my life. I just broke down and started crying on my desk, alone, in an ice cream parlor in the middle of the night. And so I would wager that many of you have had similar experiences because life isn't easy. Restaurants certainly aren't easy. But this one feels different a little bit. What is so different this time around? So when we talk about this time around, what's so different? What's different is burnout. And so a little bit about me, besides for being in the restaurant industry, I got so engaged in employee engagement, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but that it drove me to go back to school, even though I was a horrible student the first time around. And I like scooping ice cream, not studying books, but the engagement of my crew members led me toward this unsatiable sort of thirst for more information about what we can do to engage our employees and why my crew members found meaning in scooping ice cream while lawyers and doctors and accountants and nurses and doctors were burning out left and right, and why some restaurants had people totally engaged and why some didn't. So I started studying burnout, and burnout is what we are seeing now at the highest degrees ever. And this is why, and you can tell me if this sounds familiar, because there's 3 main ingredients to burnout. The first one is emotional exhaustion. And notice we don't talk about exhaustion. It's not just the demand, the workload, whatever, which is ridiculous right now, but it's emotional exhaustion that you just can't take any more of it. And what happens is when we become emotionally exhausted, that feeds into the next thing. And the next thing is depersonalization, or more commonly known as cynicism. It's when we start to question why we're in this to begin with. Our dream of running this restaurant, our dream of this business, our dream of being promoted to the top, all of that, we start questioning it. And we start questioning our life choices.
Yes. Absolutely.
And the third thing that happens is we start to lose our sense of personal accomplishment. So we feel like we're churning our wheels and things aren't getting done. We're putting in this much effort and getting this much back. And sometimes that's real. And sometimes, like now, sometimes it's real like now, and sometimes it's imagined. But either way, this is what starts to happen. We start to feel like we're doing so much and not getting anything in return. And I think if we look at what we're feeling today, I think many of us would have to say that we are in fact feeling emotionally exhausted. We are in fact feeling super cynical, and we are in fact feeling like we have lost this sense of personal accomplishment. So why now? Why does COVID make us feel burnt out instead of just making us feel regular stress or making us feel just down like normal things like the yogurt industry? So why? Because burnout has 3 parts, but there's also 3 major factors that feed in to burnout, that cause it in the first place. And so these 3 factors start with demand. And now I told you before, it's not about exhaustion, it's about emotional exhaustion. And I think you guys could relate to this. Anybody who's ever worked a busy Friday night shift, your kitchen is packed and dishes are going flying, or you're out there serving 1 million people and you hit your flow. Time stops and speeds up all at the same time. You are not thinking about anything except this feels so good. And it's weird because you're busier than you've ever been, and you got this customer calling to you here and this dish being broken in the back. But you feel energized, not burnt out in those situations. So we know that demand is not the beginning and end of burnout.
Yes.
Instead, demand is impacted by two other factors. And this is why we're feeling burnout now. And it's the secret to your success to make it through COVID and beyond. And those two additional factors are control, our sense of control. How many of you feel a sense of control in your general life right now? Not me. I know if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a restaurateur, you own your own restaurant, or you've decided to make something of yourself and go make your own career path, a big piece of wanting to do that is control.
Yeah.
But if you are seeking control in your life, you don't have it now. I don't care what news channel you're listening to. They'll say two things that contradict each other 5 minutes apart. And the doctors will say things and they'll say 6 feet. No, 3 feet. No, it's 12 feet. No, it's mask. No mask. You know, so the sense of control, remember when it was 15 days to flatten the curve? Mm-hmm. There's no sense of control now. We have no idea whether it's going to be better or worse a month from now, 3 months from now. And the other piece here is support. And so just at a moment like this, we as human beings, naturally, when demand goes up and our sense of control goes down, what do? We turn to our family, to our friends for support. We want a hug. We want somebody to tell us it's going to be okay. Yeah. And what happened when COVID hit? Mm-hmm. You better stay away from those people. Everybody lock yourself up in your house. Mm-hmm. And so we hit the jackpot here, where the ingredients of COVID completely align with the ingredients of burnout. Mm-hmm. Increased demand, decreased sense of control, and decreased sense of support. Mm-hmm. But within your restaurant, that's your world. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the greater world outside of your restaurant is going to affect you, and it's going to seep in to a certain extent. But what I love about business in general is that inside your business, you get to build your culture. You get to build your little world that's under your control. And so while demand might be increasing and we're doing temperature checks, and I saw in Austin now, are they requiring people to do logs for contact tracing? And I'm seeing all of these different things that the new demands. So there's not much we could do about these increased demands, but we can change the sense of control. We can take control, and we can give our people a sense of control by making decisions and incorporating them in decision making, and giving ourselves the sense of autonomy and what we call decision authority, and trying to figure out this new normal together. Mm-hmm. And we can also give each other support. You know, especially younger workers at a large degree, they will describe their coworkers as their second family. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers, to a certain extent, scoff at this, but younger workers for sure want and relate to their coworkers as their family. Mm-hmm. And so just like my wife and I in the beginning of our marriage, where it's so natural to push away those closest to you and just self-preservation, be like, no, this is mine. You know, that's not the right move here. You need to reach out and to support. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So are there any questions before moving on?
So far, so good.
Good. Okay. So I mentioned, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself really quick. We don't have a ton of time today, but I mentioned that back office, or it was more of a makeshift cubicle in my ice cream shop where I broke down and really learned what stress was all about. Mm-hmm. But in that exact space, that's where I also learned what resilience was all about. Mm-hmm. Because I was a young entrepreneur when I had this opportunity to purchase this ice cream franchise. Baltimore City, very close to the inner city. We had multi-million-dollar homes right across from us, right on the water. But 3 or 4 blocks from us were the projects and some very low-income neighborhoods. And so, of course, the people on the water, they didn't want their kids scooping ice cream. So all of my crew members came from East and West Baltimore. And if you're not familiar with East and West Baltimore, you can watch some episodes of The Wire and get a little bit of a taste of what some of those neighborhoods can be like. So it was in my early career that I first walked in to this ice cream parlor as the new owner. I purchased an existing location with an existing crew. And I was excited. But as I looked out on my crew, I realized immediately that our differences were extremely apparent. I was a spoiled rich Jewish kid from the suburbs, while they were mostly underprivileged kids from the main streets of East and West Baltimore. I was Fiddler on the Roof, while they were The Wire. I grew up in a world where masculinity was defined by not flailing your arm too much when you threw a baseball, while they were growing up in a world where even the smallest of them needed to know how to physically defend herself, for her pride, her health, and her life may even depend on it. Throughout middle and high school, I was going to a ton of parties, and these kids were attending their classmates' baby showers and way too often funerals. So I'm standing in front of this room and a panic came over me. I was literally from a different universe. I had grown up on one sheltered fringe of society while they were growing up on the opposite fringe of society, but I needed them to buy my vision in order for me to be successful, and I knew that. So I look out and I open my mouth and I start to describe this utopian business model. A place where the law of the land was happiness. A place where we don't believe in customers and employees. We just believe in people helping people. A place where the day it began feeling like work was the day that we had failed. And I was a wide-eyed, naive kid, and I knew that these were crazy ideas, and I knew that these kids who had been beaten down on the street, in their homes, in their schools, on the media, I knew that they would never be able to buy into something like this. But when I looked up, I was shocked to see 20 pairs of wide eyes looking right back at mine. Not only did they get it, they needed it even more than I did.
Yes.
Over the next days, weeks, months, I learned a ton about ice cream, but I learned even more about these young adults' life stories. Some of them beautiful, but many terrifying. Like the girl who was continuously molested by her own father for years before she was able to get the police involved. The girl who was struggling with eating disorders her entire high school career, sent away, being locked up in hospitals for periods of time. And Mo, a young gentleman who worked for me for a period of time, a few years, I think 5 years, and during that time lost 2 brothers in 2 separate violent incidences, had his mother in jail for drug use or drugs, for selling drugs. His aunt died from complications from obesity. And above all of this, was regularly stopped by the police for being a Black man walking to our ice cream shop, his work, in a predominantly white upper middle class neighborhood. These kids lived trauma. These kids' lives were defined by uncertainty and dread that Corona couldn't even put a finger on. And yet they were incredible. They poured their hearts into their work. As their friends were getting into trouble, these kids were devoting themselves to their minimum wage job. As other restaurants were experiencing turnover rates of well over 100% a year, they were experiencing conflicts and theft and no-shows. These young men and women were showing up to work even when they weren't scheduled. They had every excuse in the world to give up on themselves and the world around them, but they persevered. And I needed to know why. Turns out they persevered because I was too naive to not trust them. I didn't realize that they were supposed to be a liability, and I treated them like an asset. I showed them my immense gratitude because I actually felt it. I was so naive, and lucky for me, they were naive too. The 16-year-old girl from the projects didn't know I wasn't supposed to give her a key to the place. So she took it, and she was the best manager I ever had.
Wow.
I believed in them, and so they believed in me. And I taught them what I could. They taught me so much more, and they taught me how to be resilient. The more I treasured them, the more they treasured me. The more I cared for them, the more they cared for me and my business. They rose to the challenge and supported me. And we know Maslow, right? Maslow, if you've ever taken an intro to psych course, you know something about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's got this idea that, you know, we're always talking about money. And in the restaurant industry, we're always talking about how we don't have it. And we certainly don't have it to pay our people a living wage oftentimes, right? And I know that this is something that is very heavily debated and politicized and everything like that. But I know as a guy with an ice cream parlor, I couldn't afford to pay my kids, my young adults and kids, like a penny more than minimum wage. Like it was extremely difficult. But Maslow tells us that in order to motivate people, people have certain needs. And first, you need to fulfill their physiological needs. And at work, that means a paycheck. It means putting a roof over their head and food in their mouth. Next comes their safety needs. And the good thing is that their safety needs, until now, have been pretty much covered. OSHA's got them. We've got safety nets where they can get unemployment if they're out of a job, etc. But now in Corona, are we really able to guarantee their safety? And so we would need to fulfill these first before moving on to their social needs, self-esteem needs, self-actualization needs. And what's interesting is that since within the past 50 plus years, since Maslow, people say Maslow got it right in terms of the fact that we have these different levels of needs. But what he didn't get right is you don't need to fulfill every level before moving up to the next. And when our hands are tied, if you literally do not have the cash in hand to pay your employees what they're worth, because I know many of you would agree that they're worth way more than we can afford to pay. And if it's Corona, we really can't give them 100% certainty on their safety. We obviously do everything we can to sustain them physiologically and their safety needs. But we so often forget, business owners always think about the dollars and cents. How do I throw more toward those physiological needs instead of thinking about all the free stuff, which is so odd for business owners? The social needs. People want to feel like they're part of something bigger than them. They want to feel like they're a part of a community, a second family. Self-esteem, that's about giving them responsibilities. It's about handing them a key, you know, once you do your due diligence and know that this person can handle it, giving them a key to the place. It means trusting them. It means empowering them. And self-actualization. There is a reason you got into the business you're in. There is a reason. You cannot show me a business in America that does not fulfill some sort of need. If it didn't fulfill a need, it wouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. So what is it that you are really doing? What is it that you are there to actually do? You're not there because you really love the smell of fries. You know, you're there because you're making an impact. You're there because of those interactions you have with your customers, because you are a part of your community. You are adding something because you get to spread your art, you know, and the service aspect, etc. You need to be connected to that, and so do your people.
Yes.
And so we can't just focus on these bottom rungs. We can do what we can do, but we cannot ignore these top rungs, especially now. Especially now. So what can we do? Well, we know scientifically that, here's from a peer-reviewed article, they say people are walking mood inductors. I love this. It turns out that primates and birds are the only two living things or categories of living things that have these things called mirror neurons, which means that when I see you smile, the same neurons that fire off when you're smiling are firing off in my head. I am experiencing a psychological smile, even if I'm not smiling. And if we have the opportunity to be together today, it's such an easy exercise. You have everybody turn to the person next to them and smile. The other person smiles 90% of the time. And it's because we are social creatures by design. Yeah. And so we are walking mood inductors. So when I ask people, and we can ask people right now, what do you do? What have you done during Corona to engage your people? I would love to know answers to that. Mm-hmm. But I know that traditionally, a lot of times, the answer is a pizza party, right? Or yeah, we had this contest, everybody brought in their baby picture and we had to guess who's who. Okay, that builds community, but really? Let's engage people. Let's really engage people. And so people ask me, if I had to give this speech in 3 seconds, what would I say? I would say, be nice. Because when you are nice, when you are kind, when you are smiling, when you are in a good mood, that is rubbing off on everybody else. Mm-hmm. It is biological. And so you, especially if you're in a leadership position, have this unique responsibility that people look to you even more so. But anybody within your organization can choose to just be a positive person, and that will rub off on people.
Yes. Yes.
But there's an obvious question here, right, Ty?
It is.
Obvious question here.
It is. It really is, David. And when you said that, I was thinking about how much I appreciate the Texas Restaurant Association, TRA. When we do our staff meetings, one of the things that they've implemented is that we do a BYOB Friday happy hour via Zoom. Nice. But I was really looking at the window in the event that we could get someone in operations to answer that, because it would be really good to hear how they're engaging the employees during these particular times when you're not fully staffed, but you have your core staff and you're trying to rotate, to make sure everyone's having hours. Like, how are you able to have your team to still engage and have that same community and family feeling inside of your four walls?
Right. Yeah. And I hope we get an answer for that. Interrupt me if we get an answer to that, because that's exactly right. What are you doing? But then the easiest answer of all is just be the person you want to see in your restaurant. Yeah. But then there's a huge challenge there. What if I don't feel like the person I want to be or I want to see in my restaurant? I am the one who's responsible for keeping this restaurant running. I'm the one who's paying the bills. I am under more stress than anybody. And you're telling me just smile and be happy? Like, what? It's harder for me to be happy than anybody else, right? So how do we control our own emotions enough to impact other people? Because in a lot of these work cultures, and very much so in a lot of restaurants, even pre-COVID, you would walk into a restaurant and it would feel like I don't really feel comfortable being here. And then you'd see the owner walk through and you'd be like, oh, that's why, their mood rubs off on everybody else. And conversely, when you see somebody who's so jovial and happy to be there, and it rubs off on everybody else as well. So to answer this question, I've got a bus problem for you. So I stink at math, but I'm gonna have you guys do this bus problem. So if you've got a pencil and paper next to you, you could grab that. And I'm gonna run through this real quick, and then I'm gonna ask for answers. So everybody ready? Okay. So you're driving a bus. The bus comes to a stop. First stop of the day, 4 people get on. So that's 4 people get on at the first stop. The bus then makes a right followed by 2 lefts and arrives at the second stop. 2 people get off the bus and 6 people get on. With me, 2 people get off, 6 people get on. The bus then makes another left, followed by a right, and arrives at the 3rd stop where 4 people get off and 1 person gets on. Finally, the bus takes 1 more left and arrives at its final stop. You ready for the question, Ty?
Yes.
What color are the bus driver's eyes?
Ooh.
Does anybody have an answer?
Let's see what we get.
Is anybody getting angry that that was a trick question?
Most definitely. Hey, Ruben said you didn't say.
Oh, I did. We could play back the tape. What was the first sentence I said? I said, you're driving a bus. You're driving a bus. So what color are your eyes? Right?
Mine are brown.
There you go. Because the bus problem is actually a focus problem.
Got it.
Because you anticipated that I was going to ask something that had to do with numbers. You anticipated that it was going to be how many passengers are still on the bus, where directionally does the bus end up, because I'm talking about rights and lefts. But the first sentence I said was, you're driving a bus.
Yes.
And then the question was, what are the color of the bus driver's eyes?
Yes.
So this is what happens in life, and it certainly happens at work. My wife and I had the opportunity, I had the opportunity to go out to the West Coast, Arizona. I was doing some training there for like a solid week. And we had just had our first baby. And so she said, you're not leaving me home alone, not with the kid. I'm like, well, I'm just going to be in training all day. So she ends up coming. And we were one of those nauseating couples where like we were always right by each other's side. And so I'm like, but you can't be with me all day. I'm going to be doing training. Like, what are you going to do? And she said, well, we'll rent a car and we'll go explore Arizona. I'm like, really? You're going to go explore Arizona? Okay. So she and my son come. We rent this car, really unusual looking car. It like almost looked like a hearse, but it was like, but in a cool way, I guess, if that's possible. So my wife gets in this car and she actually does it. Every day she would drop me off at the training and she would take the car somewhere else, exploring everywhere throughout Arizona, and then pick me up at the end of the day. And so this car was becoming not just a cool car to drive, but it was linked to her independence. And she became very close with this car. I was a little jealous. At the end of our trip, we get to the airport and we return the car. And beforehand, she gives it a big hug. And she says to me, our van is like on its last legs. When we get back, we should buy this car. And I said to her, honey, we can't buy this car. She said, why not? I said, this is a West Coast car. And remember, I'm on the East Coast in Baltimore, Maryland. And she said, what's a West Coast car? And I said, what's a West Coast car? Well, have you ever seen one of these on the East Coast before? She said, no. I said, exactly. They only sell them on the West Coast. And she took my word for it. And I don't know why. She thinks I'm very smart. And so we get into the airplane and we fly back to Baltimore. We walk to our car, our van, which is parked in long-term parking. And we're walking up to it and she starts freaking out and hitting me. And I'm like, what? Parked right next to our car, the West Coast car. We had never seen this car before in our lives, and now it's right there. We get on the highway, start making our way home, and we pass the West Coast car, and then we pass another one and another one. And then, honest to God, straight out of the Twilight Zone, we pull down our street, and the corner house in their driveway, the West Coast car. So one of two things happened here. Either this car started selling like hotcakes that 1 week we were away, or there was something deeper happening. And it turns out that the 2007 Dodge Magnum never sold like hotcakes. So what was going on? As you may have guessed by me talking about West Coast and East Coast cars, I know nothing about cars. And so cars are completely irrelevant to me. to understand even further, my wife and I had gone skydiving. And how many of you have been skydiving before? Skydiving is really interesting. What they do is, before they throw you out of the plane, they grab you and they have you sign your life away and pay the money. That way, if you back out now, they save on jet fuel. But they throw you in this plane, and they explain to you in the training that sometimes when people step out of this moving airplane in the air for the first time, they will experience something called sensory overload. Now, sensory overload is this phenomenon that you are falling out of an airplane for the first time in your life, and there's all of these new feelings rushing up at you. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the sensations, all of it is brand new. And as you're hurling toward the ground with all of this, your brain, some people, only the best skydivers, it happened to me. I'm only slightly embarrassed to admit. But what happens is that as you're hurling toward the ground and all these new senses are coming toward you, your brain is working, it gets overloaded trying to figure out what's happening. And so you go blank, like you black out. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was supposed to pull the cord and whatever. And the guy's like, you see him on the video afterwards, slapping my face, trying to wake me up. And no, not home. I'm not home. I'm just hurling toward the ground. Thankfully, I had a big dude strapped to my back that eventually did pull the cord.
Wow.
But this is sensory overload. And this comes into play all the time. And this is what's coming into play with you at work, and why you tell me that it's difficult to be in a good mood when there's so much bad going on out there and so many difficult things going on. There is always good and bad. But what happens is that our brain has developed the first spam filter, the world's first spam filter. And that is specifically to protect us from sensory and informational overload. That basically, if we weren't protected from sensory overload, we'd step out of our front door in the morning and the sounds and sights and everything, we would faceplant on the sidewalk. So instead, our brain does a pretty good job of telling us what things are relevant and what things aren't relevant. And here's the kicker. 95% of our brain's activity happens unconsciously. 95%. Because otherwise we would be in forever sensory overload. And so what happens is when all of this information is coming at us, our brain says, nope, not relevant, not relevant, oh, that's relevant. But how does it decide? For me, cars were never relevant. So I could not see the West Coast car because it was never relevant. So my brain filtered it out before it ever got into my conscious mind. And for you, as a restaurateur, as a manager, as an operations person, whoever you are, whatever your role is, you are a trained pessimist. Your job entails detailed training on how to spot problems, because we want you to be a problem solver. And to be a problem solver, you need to be a problem finder. And so you are a trained pessimist. And so your filters out the good stuff, because the bad stuff is the stuff that could really threaten your business, your life, etc. And so you are so zoned into that stuff that you don't even see the good. There has been a lot of good, and there's a lot of potential even now during Corona. Even now. For instance, the potential to bring your crew closer together and to create bonds between them and you and your customers and you. Though that potential is there. The good news is that now I cannot not see a Dodge Magnum as it drives by. And by the way, never a popular car. There's probably 5 of them in Maryland. But whenever one of them passes by, I see it now. It is super relevant. And so you need to start activities. You need to start actively finding ways to make what your brain has told you is irrelevant, relevant again. So there's many ways to do that. But one thing I'll leave you with is what my family started doing, because we're sort of 50% optimists and 50% what my wife insists we call realists. What we started doing is every night we do what we call our favorite 3. We all get together. If I'm not in town, I dial in and we talk about our favorite 3 things from that day. And what that does is it slowly trains our brain that the positive in our life is super relevant to us. And so we start seeing it everywhere. And that's how you become the positive influence who then influences your people and has that impact on your people, who then have that impact on your customers, who then have that impact on your bottom line. That is precisely how you build a kinder kind of restaurant, even and especially so during a time like this. So I really appreciate you guys, and thank you, Ty. Anybody who wants to get in touch with me, you can use any of these methods. I also have this little scan. I call it my Feed the Flame model for building a burnout-proof culture, and it talks about all the different elements that you can build. So this is really simple. If you hold your phone up to it with the camera open, I don't know, my kids tried explaining it to me. You can open it and sign up for that. The Feed the Flame model. If you are in a leadership role or aspire to be in a leadership role, then it's definitely worth checking out. Thank you.
Awesome. I got you scanned onto my phone, David. Can't
Nice.
get away from me. Enjoyed you. Thank you so much for the information and the words, the beautiful words of encouragement. We really appreciate it over here in Texas. You be safe over in Maryland. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. When this whole thing clears up, I'm coming for some barbecue, by the way. I'll bring you guys some crabs, but I'm coming for barbecue.
We got some places for you. Thank you,
Nice.
sweetie.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.